Since I mentioned our Professor Gerber having a book, I want to mention before I introduce our speaker that he's also written a couple books. Oh, and I mentioned that in the write-up that I did for him for tonight. Those books are The Barrier's Son and Spencer's Law. I read the first book. I recommend reading it. I thought it was really good. I thought he did really good on his first book that he wrote. I haven't read the second one yet, and he says he's working on a third one. So our guest tonight is Butler County Prosecutor Michael Gmoser. He has dedicated a significant portion of his legal career to public service in Butler County. He served as Chief Trial Counsel and Assistant Butler County Prosecuting Attorney for nearly 8 years during the 70s and 80s. In 1981, he served as the prosecuting attorney by special appointment of the county commissioners during the absence of the prosecutor due to health reasons. For the past 15 years, he has been serving as the elected Butler County prosecutor, where he and his staff of assistants present criminal cases against defendants and advocate for victims. Gmoser is a lifelong conservative Republican and maintained a successful trial practice for 37 years. In addition to his legal achievements, he is an accomplished writer and a lifelong musician, and currently plays in a band called Reasonable Doubt. His diverse interests also include beekeeping and duck hunting. As the son of an airline captain, Gmoser became an expert aviator who has flown for nearly 50 years. So he's a really all-around guy. Give Prosecutor Gmoser a round of applause.
There it should work. Yes, how about that? Great. Well, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you. It's really an honor to be here. I wasn't aware until earlier today when I did a little reconnoitering to see where I was actually going to end up. But this used to be here a former Army base. How many of you are aware of that? I love it when buildings are repurposed. As you know, Hamilton, Ohio has the Spooky Nook, which is a champion paper repurposed into an event center and things like that. A lot of buildings have that, and I think it's a wonderful testament to the ability of earlier generations to build so well and produce so wonderful buildings that they have lasted so long. All right. My name, as you probably are aware, is an unusual one. It's an old Austrian name, and it was spelled with a G. G-M-O-S-E-R. You probably say, well, how does that happen? Well, you're going to find out very shortly that it's a silent G. And it's the only silent thing about it. But I'm going to try to give you as much information as I can, to tell you about the role of a prosecuting attorney in general, because there are, as you know, 88 counties in Ohio, and therefore there are 88 prosecutors in the state of Ohio. There's one for every county. And some states are different. Some states like Illinois and Wisconsin, they have district counties. And that's because some of their counties are very sparsely populated and really don't deserve much prosecutor for particular county that is 95% cornfield and owned by 3 families. So they have districts that have one prosecutor that represents several counties. That's the way it works. But Ohio, we can afford to have a prosecutor for every county. Prosecutors are political positions. We are elected officers. We have to campaign, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works in Butler County, which is different than it is in a lot of counties, because actually the way politics works, every prosecutor has the ability to design his office and his staff and his politics the way he or she sees the best way to do it. How does one become a prosecutor? I thought I ought to tell you. What is it that brought me to where I am today, where I'm speaking to you as a prosecuting attorney? And a lot of it has to do with my upbringing from my childhood and a sense of justice that I think is a general statement for most of the people in your generation. We learned about justice from our parents at a very early age. We learned where justice failed when perhaps a parent who was the inquisitor, the judge, and the jury didn't listen and agree with our plea of innocence and found us guilty, to our dismay. So we learned about those things from our parents, if we were fortunate to have parents that cared enough to inquire about what we were doing and find the appropriate blame if blame was deserved, or the innocence if that was the case. And I had all of that. My father was an old Austrian. That's where the Moser with the G, it was probably Gutmoser in the old country. We tell a story that there were two families of Mosers, Gmosers, in old Austria. One was a family of gun runners, and the other was a family of merchants and lawyers and hoteliers and things like that. And so to separate these families from the understanding of the general public, there were the Gutmosers, that was us, Gmosers, and then there were the Schlechtmosers, the bad ones, Schlecht meaning bad, the S-Mosers. Well, we were the Gutmosers. My grandfather got off the boat in Milwaukee, and my father was one of the only one in his family to be born in America. His sister and two brothers were born overseas. But the fellow at the reception center asked him how he spelled his name, and he said it was Gmoser, and they said, okay, it's Gmoser. And instead of being Gutmoser, it was just Gmoser, and that stuck with us. And it's like that old Johnny Cash song, A Boy Named Sue. When you're old enough to change it, it's so much a part of you. You just can't do it. You don't change it. That's just the way it is. So I've kept the G. And through the years, it's actually been a benefit because the way it worked in private practice, nobody knows you really. But once they learn how to pronounce your name and spell it, they never forget it. That's that Gmoser guy, you know. That worked out pretty well for me. Well, my father was a heck of a taskmaster. And what did he teach me about right and wrong? And was he entirely accurate? He was a mechanical genius. And I don't say that arbitrarily. I mean, he was just a brilliant guy. But he left high school in his sophomore year to help his brothers and sister help feed the family. His father, an out-of-work cabinet maker, a skilled craftsman. He's one of those guys that made the old cabinets that you marvel at when you see some of the old homes in this area. He could do that stuff, the trim work, he could do that. Of course, nobody could hire in the Depression those type of people. So he made a little bathroom gin, by the way. And I actually have his hydrometer from those days. And my father's mother, she scrubbed floors. And my father went with his brothers, and they got jobs wherever they could get jobs. And then two of them, my father and one of his brothers, they built their first airplane when my father was 15. And they actually flew it, and it was called the American flag. Maybe I lost some audio. There we go. It's back on again. But anyway, enough about Dad. But what you need to know about Dad is this. He eventually worked his way up to be a captain for United Airlines, flying DC-8 727s, and his seniority in Chicago was number one. The most unassuming guy I've ever met in my life. We were taking a family trip to Hawaii, and we had a pass situation. We get to the airport. The fellow that was taking the standbys, we were on standby, said, well, Mr. Moser, I don't think we're going to be able to get you on because they've got a lot of these fellows coming back from Vietnam and going out and come whatever. I don't think we can get you on. But let me have your pass, and I'll give you a call, and maybe we'll on tomorrow. Well, of course, our heart sank because we were all looking forward to this trip. But we also knew that that's the way it is in the airline business, that if you're on standby, that's why they call it standby. So my father gave him the pass, or his credentials, his airline identification card. And the fellow took it, and they looked at it. They looked at my dad, and they looked at it again. And he said, this says, you're number one in seniority. He said, Yeah. He said, just a minute. He came back about 10 minutes later. He said, I don't know if this is acceptable, but we've got 5 seats in first class. Will that work? My father had never said a word about anything. That's how humble he was. I mean, and what a good lesson for a kid like me to see his father in action like that. That he didn't play rank. He didn't say, I'm so damn important that you ought to give me a break or do something for me or give me something special. But what I really learned from him, too, was that there's more than just right and wrong. As a prosecutor, there are shades of gray. You say, well, how do you learn that from your dad? Well, he's a pilot. There is right way to do it and wrong way. There is no in between. If your assigned altitude is 20,000 feet, it's not 20,000 plus 100 or 50 or 25. It's 20,000 feet. That's your altitude. And those type of lessons I learned from him, that with him, there is no shade of gray. It's just right or it's wrong. But I also learned in life also that people are human, and there is an impossibility among our kind that we can't always stay on the right course, and that there are going to be reasons in which we stray off the line. So I learned that lesson from him that way. My mother was a saint. My father is a pilot. He goes off for 4 days, leaving my mother in charge of 2 wildcats, my brother and I. So while my father's around, we're regimented as hell. And when my mother's around, she's having a hard time finding us and controlling us. So it was a wonderful childhood that we had in that regard. We got 2 sides of discipline, the mother side and the father side. We learned some lessons from that. But eventually, I went on to college, and in college and in high school, by the way, I was very much into athletics. I was on the gymnastics team, and I was a pole vaulter in high school, and held the class or the high school record for pole vaulting. I was a nerd in an athlete's body, and I went to college, and I wanted to become a historian. I wanted to become a history teacher. So I graduated, and then I went on to a master's program, and then I had to go out east to do my thesis work. It was student activism was the title of my master's thesis, student activism in the early American universities, colonial universities. And I get out there in the library at Harvard, where I got a special dispensation to go there and go into their stacks where I could wander around and get the books myself without having somebody supervising me. And I'm with all of these fellows that are true academics. And they all had beards, and none of them talked to each other. And they were just glued to their typewriters. And this room we were at, it was just buzzing with the sound of typewriters in those days. There weren't any computers. There were just typewriters. And I said to myself, good God, what did I get myself into? Is this what I really want to do for the rest of my life? I don't think this is going to work out. And somebody that I was rooming with in Boston said, well, why don't you go to law school? I said, well, I don't know much about that, but it'd probably be better than this idea. So I'll give it a try. Where do you got any ideas? He said, well, there's one in Cincinnati. It's called Chase. You can take a look at that. So I left Boston, and I drove straight through to Cincinnati. And I got into Cincinnati about 7:30 in the morning, and I went to the Chase School, which was in the YMCA in downtown Cincinnati at the time, up on one of the third floors, second or third floor. And I thought, well, maybe there's some information. It was on a Saturday morning. I didn't expect anybody to be there. But I thought maybe they would have some information that I could at least find and learn a little bit about this idea. And there was a light on. And so I knocked on the door, and all of a sudden this guy came out looking around, and he came over and opened the door, and he said, can I help you? I said, well, and I looked really scruffy. And I probably had a little bit of an odor to boot, But he looked at me and he said, well, what are you interested in? I said, well, I'd like to learn about law school. I'm thinking about going. He said, well, what kind of grades do you have? Where do you go to school? I said, well, I graduated from Miami and working on a master's. All of a sudden, he seemed to be interested. And so now he's giving me a pitch about this. And he said, look, our classes have already, this is a true story. You can't do this again today. If this didn't happen then, I would not be here now. I guarantee it. It was impossible what happened. But he said, look, our classes, we're already 2 weeks in, but I've got 2 seats. If you want one of them, you start on Monday. And here's where you're going to go. You're going to go Professor Young's, Eugene Young, and he's our property professor. And you'll start there. You'll have to get your books and stuff like that, but I will let you in. And there's all this paperwork you're going to have to do, and you have to have all this other stuff and your transcript and blah, blah, blah. But if you want to do it, you can start. My head was spinning when I left. I thought to myself, good grief. Well, I'd never dreamed that would happen or even considered that would happen, but I was so impressed with Dean Revelos was his name, from Middletown, as it turns out, that I decided I would do that. And I went to law school that Monday night, and I was late for class, of course, my first night at law school. They've already started, they're 2 weeks in. And I walk into the room through the door, and the Professor Young looks at me and said, Mr. Gmoser, how nice of you to join us. Have a seat. I was flabbergasted. He pronounced my name correctly, number one. And he welcomed me into this class, and we had over 100 kids in the class. I mean, it was a big damn class. And that got weeded out by the time of the last year, by the way. We were down to about 30 students in that class. But that's the way it was. And so that was my introduction to law. And during that period of time, I was so fortunate. I worked for the presiding judge of the Butler County Common Pleas Court, Fred Kramer. He was a genius in law. He is so well respected. O'Neill, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, those two were pals. He'd come down, and those two would kibitz. And I was always invited into chambers while they're talking it out, and sort of got into the conversation with them, and he would ask me questions about my life and my generation and that type of thing. So it was a wonderful opportunity, and I got to see in court the best of the best that this area had to offer. I saw the brilliant lawyers from Cincinnati and the ones we had in Hamilton, Ohio, we did, and from Middletown and Butler County and some of the other adjoining counties. But Leo Breslin is an example from Lyndhurst and Dryden. He was so skilled at cross-examination. He would cut the legs out from under a witness, and the person wouldn't even know they were missing. That's how good he was. And there was another fellow, Eddie Utz was his name. His grandson is Dr. Utz. He's a pathologist, works for the Hamilton County Coroner's Office, and he works for the Butler County Coroner too. Brilliant pathologist. But Eddie Utz was a chain smoker. He'd come up. He represented all of the major oil companies, Shell and all of those, that type of companies. And in those days, with 75 and the intersections, interchanges, there was always some area that involved a new gas station and some lease involving some oil company. And Eddie was always involved in the trials on those. And he was a chain smoker, as I said, and his skin was as white as my shirt from the emphysema, because he smoked so much. But when he would talk to a jury, I learned something on how to try a case. If you really want to get control of your audience, know their names. There's nothing more precious to a person than their name. And so he would start out, if he had a crowd like this, and about this many in the panel, and he would say, Mr. Jones, I see you work at General Electric. He didn't have any notes. He had nothing. Just out there like this. Mr. Jones, I see you work at General Electric. And Mr. Phillips, you work at General Electric too. And I see that your kids are about the same age. Yours 10 and 8 and yours 9 and 10. And do they play in the same sports together at the schools that they go to? And they name the schools. Now the people are looking around and say, well, geez, that's all he can do, right? He would do that with everybody. He knew everything about them, every detail about them. And he had it memorized cold, and he never made a mistake. So I learned how to do that. And I can tell you, if other people would ask me, well, do you recommend that we do that? I said, never. I would never recommend that. Because unless you can get it 100% perfect, you will fail. You never want to do that and get it wrong. So don't do it unless you can be perfect at it. But it was a very controlling thing to do, to work with a jury that way, because it separated you immediately from the attorney on the other side of the case. It made you different. It made you somebody that they wanted to listen to. So that's what I learned from Eddie Utz. And from the others, I learned about telling stories. We had an attorney who's now deceased. All these fellows, by the way, that I'm talking about, they're all dead. Joe Bressler, wonderful lawyer. And I watched Joe try a case when I was a law clerk. And he's up there too, with no notes. And he's going through his whole case, the whole deal. Not a single note. Never missed a beat. All of the names, all of the dates, all of the issues, told the story, wove the evidence in and out and around, and wrapped up his case with the ideas of why this person was either not guilty or deserved $100,000 in damages or something along those lines. That was Joe Bressler. And I got to watch all these people. And I learned, of course, that we are lawyers and we are storytellers. And we have so many experiences. We are a collection of our past. And if we're lucky, we have a whole big collection of events that we can draw upon. And so that's why in my personal life, yeah, I fly airplanes. I have a seaplane license. I fly a seaplane too. And I fly a motorized paraglider. I take off from the ground with a parachute and fly around with it and then come back to Earth. And I love boating, and I work on engines myself, like my father. I learned how to work on cars at a very early age. When my father was out of town once, my neighbor had a problem with his car. He couldn't get it started. He came over to the house, says, "Your dad here?" I was only 10 years old at the time. "Is your dad here?" I said, "No, he's out flying somewhere." "Oh, that's too bad. I'd like to get my car started." My father always fixed everybody's car in the neighborhood. And I said, "Do you mind if I take a look?" And he sort of looked at me like, "No, okay, come on over." So I went over and looked at the thing. I could see immediately what the problem was. There's a vacuum hose that was disconnected from his carburetor. I said, "This ought to be simple enough." So I plugged that back in. I said, "Try it now." Boom, starts running out. He told my father about it. My father's pretty impressed, because I think my father thought both my brother, who's really a genius, I think he thought we were both stupid. But it's because he used to tell us how stupid we were. But that was okay. That was his way. But anyway, it was an interesting life that I grew up with, a lot of different interests. And I think that that's what eventually brought me to the writing that I'll talk about in a little bit. But what is a prosecutor? We're getting to that point now. I graduated and went on to a practice. And for 1 year, I was in private practice. I went to work with a local tax lawyer. I had an uncle in Chicago who had me lined up to be an assistant in the district attorney's office in Chicago in Cook County. And so he was disappointed when I said, "Look, instead of being a little fish in that big pond, I think I'll become a bigger fish in a small pond in Hamilton, Ohio. I know all these people now. I've sat in court with them all. I've learned all their tricks. I think I'll stick around with this area and see what I can do," which I did. So I went to practice with Ed Bruck. You probably remember Ed. He was a tax lawyer, and he wanted to have somebody in the office that could handle criminal cases, so I started doing those. And I had this wonderful run of luck. I could not lose. I was like a guy at this casino who kept rolling the dice and winning, you know? And in those days, I'd be appointed by a judge for these cases. And in those days, if it was a felony in the municipal court, the judge in common pleas would make the appointment to handle that case. It's not that way anymore. So if you won the case at that level, you didn't get paid. So I had 6 in a row preliminary hearings in the municipal courts that I won handily. And I went back to the judge. He said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll point you on another one." I said, "No, you won't. I'm not doing any more of those. I'm done with that." But I still did some more. But at the end of the year, I was such a pain in the neck to John Holcomb, who was our prosecuting attorney in those days. And he came up to me and said, "Listen, you're a pain in the you're a pain in the neck. You're a pain in the neck. I'd like you to come work for me. I said, okay. How much time do I have to think about this? He said, till tomorrow morning. True story. So I went home and told my late wife about it, and she said, well, whatever you want to do, interesting work. Why don't you give it a try? So I went back and I joined the prosecutor staff. It wasn't very long before I was trying murder cases and worked my way up in the office. And then Jon had a horrible case that we both had to try. It was called State of Ohio versus Rupert. He was a fellow that killed 11 members of his family. A horrible case. And part of my job was not only try the case with Jon, but also inventory every piece of evidence that was in the residence where this fellow lived with his family that he murdered. And it was a horrific experience because the walls had embedded fingernails from the kids that were trying to climb the walls to get away from this guy that came down the stairs with guns to murder them all, which he did. But that was pretty horrible. And there's a book that was written about it lately. I think interesting book. And pretty accurate about what it was all about at that time. But anyway, I stayed with the prosecutor's office until for 8 years as the chief, worked my way up to what's called the chief of the criminal division. And then I had a homicide case. This is an interesting case to tell you about. It happened in New Miami. There was a fellow that was just a mean SOB. He beat his children with bicycle chains. If anybody really, if it was permissible to think about it, to say that somebody deserved to die, he would probably be a candidate for that honor. He was a miserable SOB. But he was found dead in his bed. And the chief of police was convinced that it was a suicide. And at that particular time, I happened to be the prosecuting attorney of Butler County by appointment because Jon, my boss, was in the hospital with heart surgery. So it was up to me to figure this deal out. And the family was after me to release the death certificate, which hadn't been done by the coroner. And they wanted me to go to the coroner, Burkhart, and have him release the death certificate so they could get this insurance money so they could support the family. So I'm walking out of the office one night at about 7:30, and I see Dr. Burkhart walking down the street. I say, hey, Doc, on that Abbott case, when are you going to get that death certificate? The family's screaming for it. He said, that's no suicide, Gmoser. That's a murder. I said, really? Well, I walked across over to the Key Bank where he was walking down the street, and he stopped and we talked. He said, well, I said, how do you know it's a murder? He said, well, Mike, he was naked. What? How does that equate? This is why you learn something from people with experience. He said he was found in bed naked. I said, why does that make it not a suicide? He said, because nobody commits suicide naked. Even in death, people are modest. They don't want anybody to see them naked. So that's number one. Number two, the evidence didn't match up. The fellow that was in bed that was murdered was right-handed. The gun was laying in near his left hand. Number three, there's no way that shooting yourself in the back of the head would end up with that gun landing in front, right next to the palm of your hand, next to your trigger finger. He said this was staged. The guy was shot in the back of the head at close range because there's adequate stippling, we call it, which is the powder burns and things like that. So it wasn't done more than 3 feet away. It was close range. This was a murder. Really? So at that time, my investigator was a fellow named Cliff Hyde. And I said, let's get her in, Cliff. You're going to talk to her. So we did. And she came in one night on the pretext that we just needed a little more information so we could release the death certificate. Not exactly a truthful statement, but we wanted to make her feel at least comfortable that, we didn't tell her, look, we think you're a suspect in a murder case. Come on in and talk to her. So she came in and she went in to talk to Cliff at his office. And I stayed in the outer office. The doors were closed to that office. And about a half hour later, I hear the tears. I knew we had her. And we did. She had confessed the whole thing. that she got with her next door neighbor, Mary Markham, who took her to a gun shop, Gill's Pawn Shop in Hamilton, and bought a pistol. And then they found a fellow, a slug from, who was just a waif, really, with almost homeless. And they offered him $2,500 to murder this man, and he accepted that. And then they cheated him too, by the way. They only paid him $1,500, but we got him too. And I tried each one of those cases, 1, 2, 3, back to back. While a jury was considering one case, I was impaneling the jury on the next case. But I always tried those cases by myself because I'm kind of a control freak kind of guy, and I didn't want any company while I'm trying a case. And each one was found guilty, and I walked into my boss's office, and he said, "Congratulations, Mike." I said, "Well, I quit." He said, "What?" I said, "I quit. I'm done. I've got to go make my way in the world, and I've got to leave this office and get on with the practice," which I did. And he said, "Oh, wait, I wish you well." And the newspaper article said that Holcomb wished me well in all my cases except those against him. And then I went on and did what's called a medical malpractice specialty. Lawyers don't really specialize in anything except admiralty law and patent law. Those are recognized specialties. But anybody that wants to handle a medical malpractice case better become a specialist in medicine, or you're going to get roasted and burned alive. But I learned an awful lot of medicine when I was an assistant prosecutor, so I was able to handle that type of case. And then I did that for the next 36 years. And I was very successful at it, financially very successful, and my clients were successfully compensated for their losses. And it made it possible for me to become the prosecutor that I am today without sending out one request for a penny from anybody to contribute to my political adventurism. You have never seen a solicitation for a penny from Mike Gmoser, ever. Nor will you ever, by the way. And nobody has ever compensated me or given it to me, and I wouldn't accept it if they did or even tried to. Same way with my staff. I don't even know what my staff's religions are. I've had Muslims, I've had Jewish folks, I have had people from all races, Japanese, African American. And the rule in my office, I have very few policies, but I've got a lot of guidance, but not many policies. But I'll tell you what the policies that I have are. Number one, you can't be a member of the KKK. That's a broad spectrum statement. It encompasses all of the bad things with respect to racism that you can imagine. So you can't be a member of the KKK. Number two, you can't be a Nazi. We all know what Nazis are like. And in life, we have met people that we feel that are sort of like Nazis. Well, you can't be that way. No Nazis. Number three, you can't be a Bolshevik communist. Well, what does that mean? Well, Bolshevik communists advocate the violent overthrow of our democracy, so I'm not letting you in the door on that one. Other than that, I don't care what they are. I tell them they can be a Bernie Sanders socialist if they want to. I don't care. I don't care. They can be a Republican. They can be a Democrat. They can be an independent. They can be a nothing. But those other things they can't be. And it works real well. And nobody pays for the job. Nobody's had to give me a dime to become an assistant prosecutor or to assist me financially with my political adventurism. And it works real well. I have a few other lines in the sand, which are all officer-involved shooting cases go to the grand jury, all of them. No matter how obvious the shooting may be, no matter how deserving the person might be, it goes to a grand jury. I started that the day I took office. And at that time, there wasn't any Floyd from Minnesota. There weren't the cases out in Missouri. There weren't the cases in Baltimore. It was something that I learned from being an assistant prosecutor. Back in the day, my boss made the call. Was it a justifiable homicide, the death by human hand? Was it a justifiable police shooting? And he decided yes, it was, or no, it wasn't. He made that call. I disagreed with that approach. But I was only an assistant prosecutor too. It wasn't groupthink. We didn't take a vote on it. He was my boss, and that's the way he did it. I didn't say at the time, well, if I ever become prosecutor, I'm going to change that. But when I did become prosecutor, I remembered a case in which there was a fellow that was arguing with a policeman. And they get into a little scuffle. And the police officer takes out his service revolver and he hits him, bam, over the head with that service revolver. Gun went off. Blew the guy's brains out. Jon decided that under the circumstances was a justifiable homicide. I disagreed with that, but it didn't make any difference because he made the call. But again, when I became prosecutor, I thought to myself, there ought to be a public that's taking a look at this. And then along comes Floyd, and along comes Missouri, and along comes Baltimore, and all the other cities, Cleveland, everywhere where there's a police officer shooting. Now we've got them coming out of the woodwork. And in Butler County, they all go to the grand jury so that you folks can decide from what you see and the evidence that you want to know and the law that you're going to receive to make that call. Is this a case that should go to trial? Or are you going to let just one person stand there and say to you, my call and this is the way it's going to be? Now, you can do that if you want to. There are counties, one nearby, actually two. And the principle there is, well, they elected me to make that call. I have never been in a public meeting anywhere in which the general public said, we want you to make that call, ever. Nobody has ever said, it's a good idea for just you to make that call. Most people, in my opinion, want to have some oversight on how death is meted out between our police departments and our citizens. You ought to have a fresh look at it. But that's also where I also have another issue that goes on. I give the grand jurors a pop quiz, all of them. I meet them all, and I give them a pop quiz. It's only one question, and it's a multiple choice question. And the question is, whose grand jury is this? It's a multiple choice. There's four possibilities. A, it's the judge's, because after all, he's the one who instructs the jury before they are put on the jury. He takes them off if they mess up. And he's the one who selects them ultimately. So grand jury must be the judges. That's A. B, it's my grand jury. I explained this to them as the possible answer. B, it's mine. Well, why would it be mine? Well, because you know from ABC, CBS, and NBC, FOX, CNN, News Nation, and all of the other pundits out there, that a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich if he wants to. So it must be my grand jury. They're just a rubber stamp for me. And you all really probably believe that. You think they're just rubber stamps. Prosecutor, he owns them. He controls it. So that's answer B. Answer C, it's their grand jury. And then I ask them the question, how many lawyers do we have here in the room? 99% of the time, I don't get a hand up. I said, well, how many have children that you talk to at the dinner table about the law? I don't get a hand up. So I explained to them, well, what do you know about the law to be making these calls on your own? How could it be your grand jury? So, but the answer is C, it's your grand jury. And then I say D, all of the above. That's sort of a cop-out possible answer. It sounds good. Well, okay, we'll go with D, But I don't ask them to tell me what their answer is. But I have my secretary in the grand jury room play the Jeopardy music, da, 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 da. And then after about 3 or 4 seconds of that, then I tell them what the answer is. And the answer is, I pound my fist on the table. The answer is, it's always C. It always is their grand jury. It is not my grand jury. I don't tell them what to do. I may make recommendations because I know what I got to prove, but I don't say you've got to do this or you're dumb or stupid or insulting them with that type of statement. It's their grand jury. And I want the ultimate result to always be from them to decide whether or not there's probable cause for an indictment to be reached, not because somebody like me told them that that's what they have to do. That's that cheeseburger thing. No. So I also give my staff, when I introduce them, a pop quiz too. And they better pass it every time, and they do. The question, which is, what comes first in the office? What comes first? What do you think should come first? Well, the answer is always justice comes first. What about winning cases? It always comes second. A close second, yes, but always second. You say, well, wait a minute. We hired you, prosecuting attorney, to win your cases. How come that's second? And here's the deal. If winning cases is first, I guarantee you that justice will fail. When justice comes second to winning, bad things happen. And I have seen it. Now, I know that I only look like I'm 39 years old. I get that. I get that a lot. That's a laugh line, right? I tell my math challenge friends that I'm like Jack Benny. I'm 39, but you got to add 41 to that. And they say, let's see, 41 and 30. You're in your 50s then, right? Yeah, that's right. I'm in my 50s. I've got over 50 years of doing this stuff. And that's why, by the way, if you have an opportunity to elect a prosecutor somewhere, sometime in your life, try to find one with a lot of experience. Get an old one. Don't get a young one. Get one with a lot of experience in life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's not imbued with a political sense of what the politics is blowing. You know, there's a lot of politicians out there that are putting these red lines in the sand. And then along comes a wind, and what happens? The red line disappears or it gets moved. That's why I don't have a lot of policies. I've got a lot of guidance, but I have those rigid policies that I talked about earlier. And I think that what you want to have in a prosecutor is somebody that has had a lifetime of experience, that is willing to adapt that to a staff, in my case, 60-some people, 30-some lawyers. And so in Butler County, I don't look at myself, believe it or not, as a prosecutor. That's a hell of a thing to say, isn't it? I look at myself as the managing partner of the largest law firm in Butler County. And every day I get to talk to them. That's something that will resonate with you, because most of you are in my age group, except for Leanne, who works for me, by the way. And she does a brilliant job. She does our work involving what public records are admissible and that get out into the public domain and don't. But one thing that I have learned is this, that you can relate to. The older we get, the harder it is to stay relevant. Think about it for a minute. When you're younger, you've got a job, you got a family. You're relevant to your wife or your husband, you're relevant to your kids, and maybe after a while you're relevant to your kids and the grandkids. But as time goes by, there's fewer things that you are relevant to. And that can become a real lonely time in your life. That's why I am so blessed to have the job that I have, where every day my staff comes and asks me questions based on my experience. How do we do this? How are they going to come at me? How is this defense attorney? Because I was one. One of the reasons I took this job, how did I get it in the first place? How did I get into it? Why did I come back after 36 years as a medical malpractice lawyer? Why did I come back to this? This is a good question. Certainly wasn't the money. I made enough money as a medical malpractice lawyer that I didn't have to think about money anymore. So why do I want to do this? Is it for prestige? Is it power? There's a lot of that, by the way. I think there is prestige, maybe, maybe not. I know there's a lot of power because I could exercise it if I chose to. I really don't. I came back to it because there was a skunk that was the prosecutor's assistant when I was a defense attorney. And he wanted to be the next prosecutor, and he tried a case and I whipped him bad in court. Whipped him so bad that I thought to myself, this is the most unethical person I've ever met in my life. He lost that case, as he should, because my client was innocent. Not just proved not guilty, he was innocent. And that assistant prosecutor knew it. And he tried to keep the evidence from getting to me, and I was able to pry it out of him like opening up a clam. And then one of my fellows in my office came up to me, Rick-eyed, and said, Cliff-eyed son, by the way, a lawyer. We practice law together. And he said, guess who the next prosecutor is going to be? And gave me this guy's name. I said, good grief. Somebody ought to stand up and do something about that. He said, well, you shut your mouth off. You do it. So I just did. And that word went out like wildfire. I went home that night. And I told my wife, I said, well, it looks like I'm running for prosecutor. And her answer was, she denied saying this, but I remember it distinctly. She said, don't you think we should have talked about this? But she said, if you're going to do it, give it 100%, which I did. I won the damn job. Not damn job, but I won the job. And then that young pup, the Attorney General of the state of Ohio, didn't like what he did with respect to corrupting the grand jury in Butler County, and he prosecuted him, found him guilty of corrupting the grand jury. And he lost his license for a while. And that's what we would have had. That's what we would have had in Butler County for a while. So anyway, that's how I ended up here. That's why I'm your prosecuting attorney in Butler County. No other reason. I want you to know I'm back at it now for all of the right reasons. Nobody should ever take this job or seek this job just to keep somebody else from getting it. That's a pretty damn bad reason to do this. But having gotten back into it, I'm so happy I did, because I can actually feel that I'm making a difference. I have an initiative that you might appreciate, because I look at all of you, this room, and everybody that's on TV that's watching this. You are all potential victims of the scams that are rampant in this country. They are everywhere. Even at the office, I get 10 a day. 10 a day. I talk to them. I draw them in the conversation, and eventually tell them that, no, you're just a scammer. You're probably on a sat phone in a cave in Afghanistan. And then sometimes they'll just hang up, and sometimes they'll chuckle and they'll say, you'll never catch me, And I tell them, but I'm happy to talk to you, and I'd like to talk to you longer, because as long as you're talking to me, you're not scamming some innocent person. And I started what's called the Elder Abuse Task Force. And what it is, imagine the spokes on a wheel, in which each one of those spokes represents direction to a police agency. And at the center of that wheel is the Butler County Prosecutor's Office. The police have their hands full with other activities. The shootings in Hamilton County, my God, you turn on the TV to get the morning shooting report. 2 a day, or 1 a day, or maybe at least 1 a week. So they've got their hands full. So I learned as a defense attorney back in the day that scammers, even though it wasn't as prevalent as it was, there were scams that were working. And when people would go to the police department to get help, the police would say, nah, that's a civil case. You have to sue that person that's not giving you back your $2,500 that you paid to have your driveway redone. That's a breach of contract. So the police departments were applying this skewed and wrong application of criminal law to those types of cases, and nobody was getting help. So I said, stop doing that. Let me make that call. I'll go after that guy, which I did, and I do. Somebody's not doing that job, taking $2,500 as an example, and that's an actual case. I go after him, prosecute him, get him convicted, and make him pay the money back. Or the veteran from World War II who died recently, but he was scammed by a fellow in Chicago who was running a cottage industry at night and scamming the elderly. So he gets scammed out of $42,000. He went to the police department. And he reported it. And the person that was working the desk said, oh, this is terrible. It's terrible. Yeah, you've been scammed. Duh. And there's nothing we can do for you. Just not. And so the guy leaves. And a friend of his said, you know, that Gmoser guy, prosecutor, he's got some sort of a thing where you might want to talk to him. He might be able to help you. And remind me to tell you about the grandparent scam too, because I have been very successful with those two. So anyway, he comes to my office and we got to work on it immediately. And we found this culprit in Chicago. He worked in the postal service for the post office in Chicago. And at night he was scamming people, supplementing his income. So he gets arrested. I indicted him in Butler County. We arrested him in Chicago. He's standing up in front of the judge. My staff went up there to retrieve him. And so the judge is saying, is it okay? We're doing your arraignment now. And the fellow looks up and says, well, Judge, what's my bond? And I says, what's your bond? No bond. Well, what do I have? Where am I going to go? And he says, you got a choice. You can go to Cook County Jail, which is a hellhole. You don't want to go there. Or you can go with these gentlemen back to Ohio and face the music. He said, okay, I'll go. So we brought him back, prosecuted him, convicted him. And he went in front of Judge McElfresh, found guilty. And this old duffer that we represented got his money back. And we were really happy about that. But this guy was scamming people all over the place. You know, he had a cottage industry. He even scammed the Postal Service into believing that he was a victim. We deal with a lot of psychopathic people. A psychopath, we deal with psychopaths, so many of us. The definition of a psychopath is somebody who doesn't believe they have ever done anything wrong. And when they do something wrong, it's the other party's fault. So when you lose your money to a scammer, it's on you. It's never on them. It's your fault for being scammed. That's a pathological person. And we deal with a lot of those in all walks of life. But it's been very, very successful. And but that's an initiative that I started, and we've done the grandparent scam and the medical staff, the medical scam where they call up. In fact, my next door neighbor got his money back. It was amazing. He got scammed out of $1,500. They call up and they say, I'm Millie, and their voice is a little garbled. And, I'm Millie, and I'm in the hospital, and they need $1,500, and my insurance won't cover it, and you've got to help Grandpa. Can you do it? Okay, we'll do it. Where do we send the money? How do we do it? Well, you say you got to do it by this gift card thing, and you go to the grocery store and get it, and blah, blah, blah. And they did all that because they love their granddaughter. They lose their $1,500. Well, we tracked it down, and we caught the people that did it. And we not only got those people, but up the chain of command, we got the rest of them that came out of Jamaica. So it was really a chain reaction on ba-dum, bada bing, bada boom. And one of the benefits of being able to hire people, one of my best hires recently is Mike Regal. He's at 57, you retire from the FBI. And then I get a chance to hire you. If they want to be an investigator, you come work for me. So Mike came to my office. I had an opening, bam. Now I got an FBI agent with all those years and years of experience, not 50 years of experience, but 20 some years of experience as an FBI agent, doing all that kind of work, working for me. And he's in my fraud unit, and he's tracking down all these crazy cases every day. That's what he does. And those are the type of people that make me feel relevant, because then they come in and explain what they're doing and some questions and so forth. It's just a wonderful, wonderful job. Well, I've been talking for about, 50 minutes or something like that. I think I'll shift gears and talk about some books that I wrote. I got started because for years everybody had said, with all these cases that you've handled, why don't you write a book? And I never thought I could do that. I thought it would be just too time-consuming and too hard, and my grammar was horrible. But I always had a desire that maybe someday I could pull something like that off. And then it hit me with respect to an idea for a plot line, because that was the big stumbling block for me. I never had a plot line that I really thought up in my head that I thought that I really liked. And in the Farrier's Son and in Spencer's Law, I came up with two plot lines that I happen to really like. And has anybody read either one of those yet? We've got one. Well, yes, you have. Yeah. Well, anyway, I hope you do have a chance to read them, because I think they're very interesting. It tells a little bit about how I feel about the death penalty. I'm not a big fan of the death penalty, by the way, just so you know. And one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of it is not because somebody doesn't deserve the death penalty. because there's plenty of them that do. Let's not take that away. I don't like the application of it where if you commit your crime in Ohio, you get death. You commit your crime somewhere else, you're going to get life. Or you commit a whole bunch of crimes, you're going to get life. Horrible crimes. So I don't like the inequality in the application of the ultimate sentence. And that's something that we could do something about. Either get rid of the whole damn thing, which is very expensive to do, by the way. It's a heck of a drag on the system. But it is that issue of vengeance. And we are human beings. And somewhere in our blood, when you hit the right chord, there are folks that say, this person deserves to die. And that's when we have the issue of the death penalty with those that say, no matter how deserving they might be, it is still unjust in our culture to have a death penalty. And that's when we have that argument and the discussion. And it should be ultimately groupthink and an ultimate decision to be decided by you, the public. But anyway, that's incorporated into these stories, and especially in the first story. And some of my ideas on how that works are incorporated in that first story. But I think you might enjoy those. But that's how it all happened. And writing stories is not easy. It requires a lot of time and dedication. And right now I'm writing a manual for investigators that I've got to complete before I can get back to finishing book 3. I'm on chapter 8 of book 3, and I'm just sort of at a standstill. But give me a few more, should I say years? I'll get it done. And I think actually the third one's going to be better than the first two, in my opinion. Not that I'm a good critic, but I really, people will say they like book 1 better than book 2. I like book 2 better than book 1, but I think everybody's going to like book 3 if I can get it done, because it's got the mafia involved in it. It's got politics involved in it. It's got government involved in it. It's got the U.S. Attorney's Office involved in it. It's got death and destruction involved in it. And it's got Spencer involved in it. And I think you might find it interesting. We'll see. Any questions, folks? Yes, sir.
Just a minute.
I like your expression of what you feel about the death penalty. I feel that way as well, but I also know that juries do make mistakes, and so the death penalty is wrong. But I also realize that there are some people that are just so evil, they don't deserve humane execution.
There's truth in what you say, and that is our laws try to incorporate a sense of justice into the taking of a life. So we have some rigid guidelines that have to be met before the imposition of that penalty can be brought. And if a jury is unable to agree in the selection process to follow those guidelines, then they are not permitted to hear that case. So it is never about vengeance. It's always about justice. But then again, you have the arguments, is it just to take any life? And that's where you get the yin and the yang and the controversy. It's going to be around a while longer, I assure you. And like I said, I'm not a big fan of it. But I also know that as a prosecuting attorney, I took a solemn oath, any oath is a solemn oath, frankly, to follow the law. And Ohio has the death penalty. And I let the jury, because whose jury is it? I tell them that. Whose grand jury is this? You decide whether or not a case is a death penalty case or not. It's really not me. They have every right to say, is this a death penalty case? And can we decide to bring a death penalty case, even if you haven't come to us and said, I want it? Because you always hear that prosecutor is asking for the death penalty. They never tell you about whether or not a grand jury has raised their hand and said, can we consider the death penalty if you haven't even brought it or asked for it? Nobody ever tells you that, do they? I haven't heard one place where that occurs. But in Butler County, I let them know that it's their choice. We give them all of the law that applies. There was a case that was just returned last week with a death penalty specification for a fellow that is alleged to have murdered 2 people. He killed one and then killed the next one because he was a witness. He was at the wrong place at the wrong time. So he killed him to silence him. And then it became, therefore, a death penalty specification. That was the jury's call, the grand jury's call on whether or not to indict based upon that specification. If I didn't present that specification to the grand jury, they would still have the right to say to me, Mr. Gmoser, is there a specification for murdering this witness? What am I going to do? Lie to him and say, no, I'm not recommending that? No. I have to give them what the law is because that's my job. So prosecutors need to make sure that they stay within the guardrails of what their duty is. And part of it for me is to make sure that grand jury is well educated on what their role is and what mine is too. That's the way it works.
My question. So are you saying that you, on a possible death case, you go to the grand jury before the case starts and you ask them then or after the case is done about whether it's a death penalty case?
Oh, no, it always has to be as a part of the indictment.
Okay.
It is the way it works. If there is a homicide where there is a purposeful killing with prior calculation and design, and as a specification, was it a death of a police officer? Was it 2 or more people? That type of thing. Was it in the course of a burglary? That type of thing. These are specifications for a death penalty case.
Gotcha.
And that is incorporated into an indictment.
First of all, I want to thank you for what you do.
Well,
and
thank
how
you.
long you've done it. But the other question I had was, with all these drug commercials, particularly that Valar, they take this medication on top of their other medications. They think it works for their mental health. How does that affect the system that you deal with?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
With the antidepressant medicines people take, it obviously I see changes in people. How does that affect the crime?
Let me explain that. 85% of every single case that I handle, 85% of every case I handle has some element of drug abuse, whether it's the actual crime of selling drugs or whatever, manufacturing a drug, or just using it as a motivating factor for some other criminal activity. 85% of crime is involved with drugs. Our society and the criminal section of this society is saturated with drugs. So in answer to your question, it is a major league problem, and keeping fentanyl out of this country is certainly a objective that we should try to achieve. But really, from my point of view, we need to stop the demand as much as the supply. It's both. And if we didn't have the demand, the people that are supplying it would go broke. They'd find something else to use their criminal strategies upon. So yes, fentanyl is a deadly drug. I've never seen anything worse than that, frankly. They mix it with the slightest amount is enough to kill a lot of people. It's amazing, the power of that drug. And so whatever we can do to eliminate that. So when I see one of those drug boats that's blown up because they're bringing fentanyl into this country, or they sink a submarine that's bringing it in along the Pacific coast, they have these little submarines that are just very shallow draft things, and they're low on the water, and they think they can avoid detection. And our military is finding them, and they blow them out of the water. Good for them. And people would say, well, there's no due process. They didn't have a jury. They didn't have well, I'm sorry. When you attack our country, you may not have a jury. You may not have that kind of due process. What you're going to do is get a cannon shot at you, and it's going to blow you out of the water. So don't do it. Simple as that.
We have another question over here.
Correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but when you talked about all cases involving police officers go in front of a grand jury.
Officer-involved shooting cases go to a grand jury.
So does that, if I'm understanding that, then that protects the police officers. Is Butler County then more likely, if somebody's deciding where they're going to be a police officer in Cincinnati, does that make Butler County a more attractive county in which to serve as a police officer? Is that a protective feature that other counties don't?
When I first began this program, I think it's a fair question, and I'll explain it. When I first started this, and police chiefs were aware that I was not just going to make that call myself and give them a pass, especially since I'm a member of the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, and I'm a member, and they could hopefully rely on me to help them out, because after all, we're a good old boys club, because that's what everybody thinks we are. They were a little bit concerned that I might be gunning for those police officers in a negative way that were involved in shooting cases. As it turns out, in the 15 years that I have handled those cases, and by the way, I handle those cases personally. I do not delegate those to my assistants. You say, why is that? You want the limelight? No, it has nothing to do with that. I don't want one of my assistant prosecutors, as an example, who has a police officer shooting case that he would have to handle at the grand jury, and then the next day go down there with that same police department and handle a burglary case with the rest of that staff down there. I can't expose them to that. I handle all the cases. Every officer involved shooting case, I take to the grand jury personally. That's why you'll always see me linked to the news article about an officer involved shooting case in Butler County. And in the 15 years, there has not been one case that hasn't been ruled upon by a grand jury to be anything other than a justifiable homicide. Is that because there's been a good old boy telling them what to do? No, it's because there wasn't any evidence of guilt. But I have news for you. I also handle other officer-involved issues. And I expect that next week, you're going to read about those too. And you're going to say, my, Gmoser does take on police officers, and he does take those cases to a grand jury. And maybe the results are different than what you might expect. Stay tuned on that.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about plea deals and why those are offered? And I think didn't that play a part in Katelyn Markham's case?
What's the question?
Plea deals. Can you talk about plea deals and why those are
Oh,
offered?
absolutely. The Markham case in Fairfield. It was a young lady who was murdered. The city of Fairfield got involved in that case. They couldn't solve it. It wasn't my case. Look, I have certain investigative roles, true, but I allow the police departments to do their job. Just like the FBI might get involved after a police department is worn out and can't go any further, I might get involved too. So anyway, Fairfield couldn't solve it. The sheriff got involved. He's a good guy. He got involved. And so was the Fairfield police chief. He's a good guy. But they couldn't solve it. My investigator said to me, Mike, do you mind if I take a look at this case, the Markham case? And I said, of course. Give it a shot. Let's see what you can do. He dug into that case, and we were able to, after 2.5 years, pull together 80-some witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, and enough evidence where we could determine a circumstantial case of how Katelyn Markham was killed. But we had no fingerprint. We had no DNA. We had no confession. We had no photograph. We had no witnesses to the event. And so you say, well, how are you going to win that? Plus, we had no cause of death. We had a sack of bones that were found out in a field, a dump in Indiana. We had a pathologist. Well, we had a coroner in Indiana. See, the people are saying, well, you had a cause of death. The coroner said it was a homicide in Indiana. Coroner said it was a homicide. I said, okay, well, that's great. I'm glad we've got a coroner. At least I've got a medical opinion, right? No. The coroner in Indiana is a certified embalmer for a funeral home. She is not a doctor. That's what they hire in Indiana. They can't get any people to do that job, so it can be damn near anybody they want. Her testimony would be worthless. Her opinion that it was a homicide, inadmissible. Certified embalmer. But she was smart. She sent the bones to the pathology department in Hamilton County. A brilliant guy there. And he could determine whether it was a homicide, whether it was a suicide, whether it was an accident, natural, or undetermined. So now we're going to get an opinion. And what was his opinion? Undetermined. That's our expert testimony on the cause of death. Now you tell me, how am I supposed to win that case at the end of the day when your ultimate cause of death is undetermined? Now, I've taken on cases where I had no body and I was still able to prove a death. When I've got a confession, when I've got a bullet, when I've got fingerprints, when I got DNA, I can do it without a death. And in the case you're going to read about next week, you're going to see a video on TV. I'm not going to tell you about it because the case hasn't been released yet. I'm not going to tell you what it is, giving you a little tip, a little preview. But it's interesting, very interesting. So in this particular case, what I also had as a problem in the Katelyn Markham case was I had warring police officers within the department. One of the detectives said that Jon Carter was not guilty. She was convinced he was innocent. We had another detective in the same department who was convinced that Jon Carter was guilty in the same department. And I'm going to go to trial with a case where I got one detective saying he's innocent, another saying not guilty. How's the jury supposed to sort that one out? Well, by extrapolating the evidence very, very carefully and convincing that one detective that she probably got it wrong, even though I don't think she was ever totally convinced of that, but we were, and that was important. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you say, well, how did you work out a plea bargain in that case? I didn't work out a plea bargain. We were prepared to try that case. We were going in a 2-week period of time, we were going to trial. The defense attorney came to me and said, Mike, we've gone through all the stuff you've got. We know what you're going to do to us in trial. Our client is willing to plead guilty. Will you accept that plea to manslaughter? My answer was yes. The last thing I wanted to do, frankly, was take that case and lose it. And frankly, with the evidence I had, I didn't want to really take that case and win it because I knew that what would be coming would be appeal after appeal after appeal on a case that was weak and circumstantial all the way through. And the likelihood of getting reversed on appeal was also looming very high. And he would be going through life claiming that he was innocent all the time, no matter what happened. Whether it was a guilty finding or not guilty finding, he'd still be protesting his innocence. The best thing I had was a guy to walk in front of the judge on TV, all the cameras, and say, are you guilty or not? Yes, I am guilty. There wasn't what's called an Alford plea, which was, I'm really innocent, but I'm going to plead guilty anyway. No, I would never have permitted that, by the way. And why would I want a plea? I wanted the accountability as a certainty. Did he get 3 years? Yeah. Am I sad that he didn't get 50 years or 10 or whatever? Oh, of course I am. It was more important to me to have accountability with him saying, I did it, so that the father of that young girl who had been accused in the public eye multiple times of probably being involved in his own daughter's death, to give him some peace that somebody came forward and admitted that they did it and it wasn't the father. So that accountability was worth all that I could get in that case, and I was happy about that.
Could we get one more quick question in here?
Mike, quick question. I thought Ohio had a rule that certain cases had to go to the grand jury. Is that not true?
No, the prosecuting attorney has
Make-
wide discretion
Okay.
on what can go to a grand jury.
Am I correct that some states have that rule though?
I
That a
have,
felony and above has
I got enough problems figuring out what Ohio law is rather than knowing what everybody else does.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
From all your experience.
Yeah.
Where do you advise a client to go with a judge only and no jury?
Okay, but before we get to that question, there are cases that don't go to the grand jury but are required to go to a jury. Those are appropriation cases, eminent domain cases. Those are required to have a jury, but that's not a grand jury. That's just a jury question. Now, your second question was,
Your experience, have a judge only or a jury?
well, I think, frankly, I would like to have a prosecutor have the right to a trial by jury, just as the defense has a right to a trial by jury. Right now, the way it works, I have to rely on what the defense wants to do. If they want a jury, they get a jury. If they don't want a jury, it goes to the judge. Either I would rather have it on a case-by-case basis. I would like to be able to make that choice strategically. There's some cases that are better for a jury and some cases that are better for a court. Some cases are so complex that a jury is going to lose their way, but a judge isn't. And there's less grandstanding and less prevarication that goes on when you're trying a case to a judge because he knows when it's BS and when it's not.
We got one last question over here.
This is, you could probably talk for an hour on this, or you might just not choose to address it at all. So I'll make my question real quick. Hamilton County's justice system is terribly broken. My opinion, a lot of the Hamilton County Police Chiefs Association, it's their opinion too. They're organized. We're going to have a speaker in 2 months from now, the chief of Evendale. It's a mess. And it seems intentional. I live in a safe neighborhood. There are places in Hamilton County, places and times, you're really taking a risk to be there. Yeah. So quick question.
Was there a question in that?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm asking you, I wish you were our prosecutor.
Oh, thank you.
Our prosecutor, I think had zero trial experience.
I think Connie Pillish had one, as I understand it, just from what I've read, I thought she had one case somewhere at some point. And like I said, if you're going to be electing a prosecutor, elect a prosecutor that has vast experience. That's just me talking, That's because I came up that way. And so I'm talking from my own personal aptitude for this job. But maybe a young man or young woman would have the same brilliance of an older person, and that's great. But they've got a lot of learning to do. I would rather have that old person. They say, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But here's my answer on that. The old dog usually knows all the tricks. Thank you.
Let's thank our guest.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Quite welcome. Yeah, thank you.
So, and Tom Hagedorn, if I can answer your question a little bit, we've got good news on our prosecutor from Hamilton County. She actually entered the courtroom and tried her first case this week. So she doesn't quite have your level of experience. And I'm sorry, we didn't get your books here tonight to give away, Mike. Which book do you recommend that people read first?
Well, you've got to read The Farrier Son first.
Okay.
Because that's the one that develops him. He started out as a defense attorney, and he comes into a prosecutor's office in another town, in another county, and he is hired on with a prosecutor, perhaps a fellow with a lot of experience who had a great record as a death penalty expert, who had a tremendous record for convictions on death penalty cases. And Spencer admires him, he respects him, and the story moves forward from there. And I don't want to give anything away on how it works out.
We've got a few books out of one of our classes. Let's thank our guest again.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.